Welcome, welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, Maestro Jerry. We're so excited to have you here this is our fourth session, our fourth community conversation. So we are so excited and honored to have you here with us, Jerry. My name is Jennifer Ponce. I'm the Prevention and Education Manager here at Laura's House, and we want to welcome all of our attendees who are here joining with us this afternoon. We are here on our webinar. We are also live currently on Facebook. So before we begin, Jerry, I'm not sure if there is a way that you, let's see, if there is a, one second. Sorry about that. If there's a way that you would like to begin the meeting.
No, I'm fine with whatever you all are used to doing, and then I can begin, however.
Okay, perfect. So for everyone who's not familiar with Maestro Jerry and his work, a lot of the information was sent out in the webinar and in the information that you all should have received in your emails. But we would like to begin today's conversation. We're going to talk about healing, and we're going to talk about ways that healing impacts our prevention and our prevention work, especially when it comes to intimate partner violence and domestic violence. So Jerry, we are so lucky and thankful that you are here with us today, and we are going to go ahead and get started. And the first question that I have for you is, what do you feel is the cause of intimate partner violence?
Well, thank you all. First of all, let me just thank you for inviting me here today, and thank everyone who has chosen to be here or is listening in whatever way. And I do want to begin just by thanking the Creator, thanking the ancestors, thanking my family. You know, the ancestors that I come from. I will begin by acknowledging my mom, Maria Suso Lague Ramos, who's from Chihuahua. My dad is Jorge Perez Tello, who is a Tapilan Coitecan from Yanaguana, which is commonly known as San Antonio. And so we come from that Texan Mexico area. My dad was one of 15. My mom came from a smaller family, one of 14. So we grew up in big families, but I ended up and raised in Compton, you know, and I share that with you as a partial answer to that question, that, you know, that I believe along the journey, not only of myself, but probably of my parents and maybe my grandparents and great grandparents. There's certain things that we learn or experience that we carry with us. You know, I remember my dad being a very loud talking man. You know, hey, what's the matter? Get over, you know. He just talked like that, you know. And my friends would come, your dad, man. I said, no, that's the way he talks, dude. You know, it's like, you know, but that's just the way he was, and you know, didn't understand why he always needed to talk so loud and so brusco and so, you know, heavy, and you know, until I began understanding my dad's story, understanding what he had to go through, understanding what he had to deal with, you know, and the same thing for my mom. My mom was a very, you know, hardworking woman. You know, I when I went to college, I read about all the cultural things that, you know, Mexicana, Latina women are supposed to be humble and very submissive, and you know, and I'm saying, well, I don't know any of those, because my mom was a tough lady. My sisters would kick your ass in a second. My abuelitas, who could, you know, with their prayers, could, you know. So I grew up with very strong women, you know, but at the same time, I saw, you know, I grew up in a family in which I saw, you know, things that made me question, you know, why wasn't my mom really affectionate? You know, I mean, she was very hardworking. You know, she did everything for us, and very responsible and all of that, but she wasn't able to be, you know, really affectionate with us. And I wondered, you know, and I share that because you say about intimate partner violence. You know, I watched my parents' relationship, and I watched the relationship of adults, you know, that I lived around. You know, at that time, I didn't understand racism. I didn't understand oppression. I didn't understand, you know, inequity. I didn't understand woundedness. I just knew they did some things that didn't feel right to me. And I also realized later on, it didn't feel right to them either. But there's certain patterns and certain ways that I saw, you know, in them that made an impact on me in and showing me examples, but also saying, well, I don't know if I want to be like that. I don't know if I want to do things like that. Um, and so I say to you that in all my experience, it's not a singular answer. It's not, how, you can answer it one way. It's really about a whole process that many of us, this society has indoctrinated people of looking at things in a certain way. Whole thing of racism and oppression, that is a major impact on how we even deal with relationship, the socialization, the colonization, making us certain ways. I remember as a little boy, I was taught, I couldn't cry when something happened. No, no, llores, no seas chillón. What's the matter with you? And so I had to eat my feelings. I had to pretend like things didn't bother me. And later on, I began understanding how physiologically that damages you, how even your body, it damages you. But then I realized when my dad died at 13 and I couldn't cry. Oh, I was feeling like, hurting inside, and I fronted it up. My friends say, hey, dude, I'm sorry your dad died. That's all right, man. That's the way life is. I was fronting up, and no, but that's your feet, that's your dad. Well, that's the way life is, man. It just goes but inside I'm hurting, but I couldn't cry. Even in I forgot how to cry, right? And so the socialization that I had gone through, not just because of patriarchy, but because I lived in a barrio, I lived in a neighborhood that you had to be tough just to get to school. You had to be tough just to make it. You had to be tough because I grew up at a time during the first riots or protests in LA, in the 60s, where there were tanks on the corner of my house, National Guards with AK-47s. So just to go to school, I had susto. I was afraid. I didn't want to leave my house. My mom's there. My but hey, I got to get to, mom says, vente a la escuela. Okay. And you have to pretend like nothing was bothering you. And these people that were, cocking the AK-47s and looking at you, it's like, what do you do, man? Well, you just pretend. You keep pretending like nothing is bothering you. And what happens after a while, it shuts you down. Right? It shuts you down from feeling. It shuts you down from sensing. It shuts you down from being compassionate. It begins to indoctrinate you, you know. And this is not an excuse, but it's very alive and well right now, because as we're talking about racism and we talk about inequity and we talk about injustice, all of those things have a tremendous impact on how we grow up. In talking to my sisters, it was the very same thing, because they had to grow up and survive too, you know. And I think that, sheltering in place is nothing new for us. When the migra would come around, we sheltered in place. When the cops came around, we sheltered in place. We didn't have a lot of money to go places, so we sheltered. This is not new for us, but the reality is that all of these things have an impact on your life. So the social inequities that people face, have a tremendous amount of impact. I'll say the other thing is that because I didn't have a counter narrative, I didn't have any one to go to say, is this real? Is this the way I'm supposed to be acting? Is this what I'm supposed to be feeling? So I ended up believing, when I saw my dad yell at my mom or begin to hit her, the narrative at school is, well, that's the way Mexicanos are. We're macho. That's the way your culture is, right? And I began to believe that. But the other thing that happened in me is, when I saw that, there was a deep shame in me. Wow, that's what men are? That's how we are? And I didn't want to be anything like my dad. So, what I did, I had to figure this out. My dad's dead at 13. I'm going through life trying to be a young man. I had to figure this out. And so what I did is I tried to be everything else with my dad. He was brusco. I didn't want to be brusco, right? He was tough. I didn't want to be tough. So I became, and I'll just, I became the friend to everybody. All these girls, I was like their brother. I was the nice guy, right? And you know, it was a dilemma for me because I wanted to date some of those girls. And I remember asking for a date. No, you're like a brother to me. I don't want to be your brother. I want to date you. No, no, you're too nice. You're like, you know, and it was like, what? You know, I mean, so what do I got to do to get a date? Do I got to be hard? Do I got to be rough? Do I not have to stop being compassionate? You know, these are all the things that, you know, as I grew up, but now, you know, after doing this work for some 40 some years and working with young men and working with older men and working with mothers that raise boys and working with girls, this struggle of how do we be is then a dilemma that if we don't have a place to discuss that and understand it and heal that, then we end up going with the indoctrination, you know, and not until much later that I began realizing that, you know, it was the woundedness. It was the internalized oppression that had been going on for generations from racism and oppression and identity, you know, denigration, that all of that impacted all of us, you know. So when I work with families today and when we do our trainings and we do this, you know, and it's not only a, you know, gender identity, but cultural identity too, because the false narrative was that that's the way Mexicanos are, and that's not true. What I began to understand is men are loud and violent and patriarchal when they're wounded, that there's a sacred part of who we are. Because I had, you know, another tío that was completely opposite, you know, and he had gone through a different path, you know, and what I had to realize is I had to choose the path, but I was getting indoctrinated. That's the way you're supposed to be, right? And so all of this contributes to all of that, right?
Yeah.
You know, you know, we could go on further, but
No,
I'll just start there.
that is, you know, it's amazing that you're able to lift up a lot of these things that we have absorbed or we've adopted as truths just based on either our environment or our culture, whatever was demonstrated and modeled for us. And I love that you even talked about just being a man and that, you know, well, I was taught that if I have an emotion, I have to bottle it up, you know, and that in essence almost defined, I feel like, manhood for you and as it does for a lot of our young men. And, you know, so my next question would be, what are some, and you talked about some of these things, but what are some other common misconceptions that we have about these dynamics of domestic violence? Like, what are some other misconceptions, I think, as society or as individuals, you know, that the way that we define it, what are some of the things that are not truths?
Well, violence is not part of our culture. It's not part of our sacred culture, our indigenous rooted culture. It has become for many of us, for all of us, part of false teachings that we've integrated. We've integrated patterns and we've integrated practices and we've integrated perceptions. But those are learned behaviors, right? But the thing that society has done is society has made those stereotypically, categorically who we are. And so it means that if you really want to be down with your culture, you got to be that. No. And that's oppression. That's racism, right? You know, so that's a falsehood. The other thing is that even within the domestic violence field, we have categorized things. We kind of say, well, these men need this kind of instruction, right? No, we all need to understand what humanity means, what compassion means, what honorable relationships mean, what sacredness means. So in the work we do, whether we're working with fathers or whether we're working with mothers or whether we're working in terms of rites of passage or teen fathers or whether we're working in healing circles, it all has to be integrated in there, right? And you know, we work with a lot, we've over the years worked with a lot of single mothers who raise boys to be very, very patriarchal, to be very misogynistic. And so what we also need to understand is that, if you will, that mist of separation of misogyny filters into all of us, right? And so how do we, you know, reconceptualize all of this? You know, I think, you know, for me, um, you know, it was almost 32 years ago, and we've been doing this work for a long time. One of my early experiences, I was drafted into the military forcefully, and then I came out, and I began working at a community center, and I was supposed to be a recreational aide, right? and I was open up a center, and the kids would come there and play, and they shoot pool and all of that. Well, one day I went into the open up the center, and young kids came in, being shooting pool and all that stuff, but none of the girls were in the room. They weren't and I said, where are the girls at? And one of the guys said, oh, they're in the back. And so I went in the back, and there was a group of girls, and they had one girl against the wall, and they were just yelling at her and cussing her out. And I'm saying, what's going on here? And what I found out is that weekend, these girls had been at a party, that one girl had drank a little bit too much, got intoxicated, and she was raped by, and in fact, two of the guys that raped her were in the recreation center, right? But these girls were on her. Stupid B, you shouldn't have drank. You should have known how to, And so I had to get that girl, pull her out, right? I closed the center. I had to take her home, right? And I'm just a recreation worker. I don't know what I'm doing, but I had to get this girl who was obviously traumatized, had been raped over the weekend, and nobody had dealt with that. And I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do, you know. I just remember what my mama did when people would come to her. And the thing is that, in my home, I learned that sometimes I come home from school and there'd be a señora there with her kids, and my mama says, say hi to your tia. Hi, tia. I don't know who she is. Go play with your cousins. I don't know who they are. And then I'd see the bruises on the lady's arms. I just noticed that. I didn't realize that my mom just took care of people, and that's what we did, And then she'd tell my dad, and my dad would get some of the hombres and go over and confront this man, right? That was the traditional way of doing it. You went and say, Valema, you better not do this again, porque, that was the traditional, and so it kicked in again. What am I supposed to do? I got to take care of this. I got to take her home. And as I'm taking her home, she starts to cry harder. And she says, no, but my dad doesn't know. Don't tell him, he's going to get mad at me, And I'm thinking, well, what do I do? The dilemma of and he's going to think that I did something to it. So I drive up, her dad is cutting the grass, and she says, my dad, don't tell him. What should I tell him? No, just, and he stops and he looks, and I said, well, I got to tell this man, but I didn't know. I don't have no training. So I just go up, señor, and pues, gave him my name. I work at this recreation center. Su hija está, she's afraid. Pues, ¿qué tiene? ¿Qué pasó? I said, well, tiene miedo. I said, of what? I said, well, something happened to her over the weekend, and she thinks you're going to get mad at her. Pues, está bien, mi hija. She's okay. Yeah, she's okay, but she's just afraid, And I said, but, some guys hurt her. That's what I said, hurt her. I didn't have the words at that time. And he looked at me, and you could see in his eyes, he knew what I was talking about. And I said, but señor, por favor, don't get mad at her. No es su culpa, it's not her fault, And I went to get the daughter, and I brought her out. And the father looked at her. Mija, ¿estás bien? Are you okay? She said, yeah, daddy, vente pa acá. And he hugged her, right? He hugged her. And he began to cry, right? He began to cry, and I saw in this man, the ability to move beyond whatever he may have wanted to do, to be there for his daughter, and it really impacted me a lot. That was my first experience being an advocate, being whatever. I was just a recreation worker, but they had put me on the path. Not too long after that, I began working for the East LA Rape Hotline in East LA. I was the first male that was hired to work with when there was some type of altercation or assault. I would go talk with the males. I'd have to talk with the fathers and the brothers, And through that experience, what I learned is that woundedness of violence affects us all. And sometimes we as men don't know how to react. We don't know how to be. We don't know what to say. And what happens many times is it triggers in. And the father, I went to see him the next day, and he was so upset because he says, es mi culpa. I didn't protect my daughter. He says, but I don't want to be like my dad was and being rigid. You can't go out. You can't. So we let her go. And maybe I should have been like my dad. No puedes salir. You can't go no place. He says, it's my fault that that happened to my, and I had to talk to this dad. No, it's culpa de, it's nobody's fault. It's, but, and then the other thing I had to do is go get these two guys, that had sexually assaulted. And that was a whole other experience, because what I found out is both these boys that had been sexually assaulted had been sexually abused as kids. So now it's just this whole, continuation of woundedness, right? And it's something that I think as a society we don't want to deal with. We want to isolate it. This domestic violence, sexual assault, this is racism. We want to isolate it. And what we've learned in our work over the years is it's all interconnected.
Mm-hmm.
The woundedness is all interconnected that way. And we have to, unfortunately, we got funding sources that says you deal with domestic violence, you deal with substance abuse, you deal with mental health. It's all interconnected, and so we have to create a new narrative about how we really embrace people and heal them, from their woundedness, but also at the same time, the accountability is important, and the safety of whoever is in danger is important. And the critical thing is, how do we balance all of that?
No, absolutely. And I love that you shared that story, because even as advocates, for some of us who have been in this field, we could be confronted with a similar situation, and that same, like, not knowing how to respond and how do I take action. It's hard, being someone who doesn't know or someone who knows, and acting as a bystander, especially when faced with trauma.
Yeah.
Which, you touched a little bit on my next question for you, which is about that, which, how does you touched on how trauma plays a role, but I'd really like to dive deep into how healing plays a role in the prevention of intimate partner violence, or as you mentioned, the intersectionality of the different types of violence and traumas that people may face.
Yeah. So 32 years ago, a group of us, well, me and Dr. Ricardo Carrillo, who's been doing this work for years too, we have been, advocating for more prevention work and more work around working with men, because we knew we couldn't stop this without working with men. But there's no funding for that. And at that time, the women didn't want us around. I was one of the few males back in the 70s. I would go to a domestic violence conference, they would kick me out. There's a perpetrator in here, kick him out. They would kick me out of the conference. I couldn't go because I was a male. And back then in the field, males could not be around. We were seen, just as the enemy. But, fortunately, as we were doing this work, there was a number of chicanas, women that really began dialoguing. No, we want the men to be involved. We need the men to be involved. We need you to do the work, and it was really, I want to acknowledge, especially the women of color who challenged the narrative of separating men from women and said, no, we have to work together. And it was, and they met a lot of challenges by the women that were guiding this in that era way back in the 70s. But nevertheless, we wanted to do some programming that was culturally relevant, that really addressed the woundedness and also reinforced the accountability. So I put out a notice, me and Ricardo put out a notice to men, let's do something, because the system's not doing it and nobody's funding it. And so out of all the men that I put it out to, 19 men came together. And I'll just be real honest. On the bottom of the flyer, I put no alcohol. We're not going to drink. And some of my friends said, "What? We can't have a six-pack after?" No, no, no drinking. So half my friends didn't want to come because they couldn't imagine a weekend without drinking. I mean, talk about the socialization, right? But 19 men showed up, and we began. Before we started, we knew we all of us reflected on how our grandmothers used to begin the day. And in my home, I was taught by my abuelita that before you do anything, you pray. And so we offered a prayer. Creator, guide us. We don't know what we're doing. We haven't done this before. We're trying to do the best we can. Guide us. And we opened it up, and then we did a conocimiento, meaning we introduced ourselves. And there were men from different places. Actually, there were guys from different barrios that didn't get along. They were part of those 19. So we were kind of afraid there's going to be a fight here or something. But the second brother in, he's an elder now, Efrain. He shared his intention about wanting to work with men and wanting to really help in the community because he grew up with that. But he says, but what's really on my mind right now is I'm married, I have 3 kids, and I don't know how to love. I don't know how to love my wife. I'm afraid to get close to my kids because of what happened to me. And he acknowledged that he had been sexually abused. And he began to cry. Now, 32 years ago, seeing a Mexicano man cry was like, what? What's going on here? Because we weren't used to that. But he began to cry, and not just cry, he began to sob. And it touched us all. And what happened is then people began to share, all the men in that circle began to share about their woundedness. Now remember, we're social workers, we're the lawyers, we're the professional ones. And what we realized as we went around that circle, that we were all jacked up. That even though we had made it through school, got our degrees and everything, we hadn't dealt with our wounds. And some of those guys that were professionals were having difficulty in relationships, or they were really good lawyers, but they're drinking every weekend. Or some of them might have been advocates for domestic violence, but they're still very misogynistic. And what we realized at that circle is the first thing we had to commit to do is heal ourselves. That it wasn't knowing the teachings, it wasn't knowing about this aspect of violence, and it was about living those teachings. And that was the beginning of the National Compadres Network. It was the beginning of a philosophy that says it's not just doing the work, it's living sacred manhood. And that was the first journey. So what I want to say is that many of us, that are in this field, we have to do our own healing first. We can't just help others. We got to do our own healing, and that's part of the path. And that's a lot of what we offer and what we recommend to everyone, even those that are practitioners. But again, working with men and women that are struggling with this, it's really about embracing the healing path. So, and I don't know if you want to go deeper into what healing is, but I just wanted to share that. That's kind of the basis.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And I think that I would like to dive a little bit deeper into what healing is, because I think when we hear those words, sometimes the word healing in and of itself can be stigmatizing or shaming, because that tells me, wait a minute, there's something wrong, there's something I have to do, and maybe I don't even know what the first step is or what that looks like, or how to realize, like, we're all, I like that you said that we're all the professionals, yet as a collective, we all share that common theme. So how do we change the narrative around those who either experience or cause harm? And also, how do we promote healing? And if you want to dive deeper into healing, I would love that. I think that the group and everyone who's here watching this webinar would love that. How do we promote it, and how do we understand healing in a way that moves us away from that shame and that stigma?
Mm-hmm. So Western society sees woundedness as pathology. In indigenous culture, in traditional culture, then woundedness is just the reflection of your sacredness. That all of us have night and all of us have day within us. We all have blessings, we all have gifts, but we all have lessons to learn. And we all have things that have happened to us that we will continually through the rest of our lives. If we don't pay attention, they will get us. They will manifest in our bodies. The body keeps the score, right? And so those things that we can pretend away or push away will get, and especially now in COVID, in this time where we're sheltering in place, you're seeing a lot of people's wounds begin to manifest. And we see increases in domestic violence, because before, where you could isolate or go to work or go do something else, well, you can't. You got to face your kids, you got to face your partner, you got to face each other. So a lot of the woundedness that we mask by working too much, by eating too much, by staying busy, now is beginning to come out. And for a lot of us, many people are getting depressed, a lot of anxiety disorders, a lot of issues, regarding hopelessness that are really beginning to come out that, we would mask in doing our work. So really, the sense of woundedness is in everyone. We all have wounds. We all have issues that we need to deal with. That doesn't make you, it doesn't make you, a deficit or make you have pathology. What it means is that's what you need to pay attention to. And those are the lessons that can actually help you more. So my mom would say, no hay mal que por bien no venga, right? So even something that appears negative can really, you can transform that into medicine. And what I mean by that is, many of us that do this work, We do this work because we came from a woundedness, and we worked and faced that, if you will, that pain, that struggle, embraced it, began to understand it, shifted it in our lives, and then now we can give it back to others. It becomes a bridge for other people. We don't have to be ashamed of it anymore. See, when you're ashamed of the wound, you're trying to hide it, it hurts you. When you can manifest and say, you know what, I've been through this. Yes, it was a time in which I wouldn't acknowledge my dad, had issues with alcohol. But I acknowledge that straight up. That was my dad's medicine, and it manifested in not some good ways. Well, sometimes it was good because he would give us money when he'd be drinking to it, but most of the time it wasn't good. But so how do I transform that? How do I transform that in my house? We don't drink, and at the birthday parties for my kids, there's no alcohol. I transform that, and I use that as teachings, right? So it's not that you need to be ashamed of the woundedness, but let me mention something about healing. Healing is feeling. If you're not willing to feel, if you're not willing to sit and allow your emotions to shed and to reveal, then you really can't heal. The other thing is healing is feminine, right? And we live in a society that is very patriarchal, very masculine. Even all the interventions or cognitive behavioral, that's a masculine process, right? You can stay in your head and stay there. Let's just logically think of, and so we create even evidence-based practice. It's very masculine because you're looking at data and behavior. And that's why a lot of us have difficulty, because even when we're healing, how do you get funding for healing? Well, it's kind of touchy. No. It's because we live in a patriarchal society, and healing is the feminine part of us, right? So for us men, in order for us to heal, we have to embrace our feminine. We have to embrace our tears. We have to embrace our fears. We have to embrace the things that we're afraid of and that we hurt with, right? And that for us, it's a journey for women as well. There's many women that even though they're mujeres, they have difficulty feeling too. And I talked about my mama, right? It was interesting because my mom was a really good mom and everything, but I after a while going to school and learning about bonding and connection and loving, I said, why did my mom tell me she loved me? Why couldn't she, abrazarme the way they say Latina mother is supposed to do? And so I decided to do it to her. I came home and she'd be cooking. I said, Mom, I love you. Sí, mijo, you want a taco? No, but I love you. Ah, okay, you want to eat? And I'm saying, dang, can't you say it back to me? I said it in my head, I didn't, and in my mind, I was criticizing her, right? Not till much later, actually after my mom, was passed, did I talk to a tia. And I was talking about how good my mom was, and we're talking about that. But I said, but I wish my mom could be more affectionate. And my tia shared with me, well, you don't know what she's been through, right? And my tia then shared with me as an adolescent girl, my mom, did get assaulted. And she says, and she changed. Se cambió completamente. And the thing is that in order for us to heal, we need to leave judgment out. And in our field, in a field, a lot of the field, we judge people. We judge people. Look at how he acts. Look at how she acts. Look, why does she stay with it? Why, the judgment brings more shame. And I'm not saying that we can't advocate and we can't try and make people aware, but we have to look at healing. Really is walking, committing to walking with somebody. If you're going to help somebody heal, you're going to sit with them, and it may be 5 years before they decide, I'm ready to do this. But let me sit with you and let me just be with you. Let me acknowledge you and accept you for where you're at. And that connection, that acceptance, that I'm going to hold you in sacredness until you're ready. And sometimes, you hear the stories that I tell and I share. Sometimes people can't share those stories, but when they hear me share a story about my mom, it then opens up something in them. Our traditional way is through stories. And sometimes the person that you're supposed to be working with is not ready to share that story yet. So we have to share the story and not criticize them and say, oh, you're being resistant, or you're holding back, or you're not. No. They're not ready, you know. And so even the way that we provide awareness and outreach and intervention and therapy, you know, it really has to be with a lot more compassion and a lot more inclusiveness, and recognize that we're all on this journey together, you know. So, I mean, and that's what healing is. Healing is connection. Healing is acknowledging, getting closer to acknowledge yourself as a blessing, as sacred. Healing is recognizing that all of us have a sacred purpose, and even the wounds in our lives can serve a sacred purpose in the work that we do. Healing is recognizing within our culture we have medicine that is available to us. You know, and I remember as kids, you know, we would get sick. My mom would go to get the yerbas and make this yucky tea, make us drink it. But even though I didn't like the tea, what really was healing is my mom was paying attention to me. She was saying, I care. And when someone shows that, your healing medicine inside you begins to stimulate, right? And then the fourth thing healing is you got to make a commitment to do the work. You know, it doesn't just happen. You got to be willing to do your own work that way. And for those of us that are practitioners, it means our own self-care. It means our own time in terms of taking care of ourselves. It means us, you know, going through and recognizing that we need to work on our wounds as well. So.
Wow, that was beautifully said. And I feel very deep, very poignant, and I love that you brought up that element of almost like having, you know, grace and grace for others, grace for ourselves, compassion, healing, and helping us understand more of what that looks like, you know, and that leads me to wonder, how can we, and you sort of started touching on this, but, you know, as advocates, as practitioners, as community members, how do we facilitate healing within our own communities, and how can we be part of that solution when it comes to the prevention of domestic violence, or even the prevention, I'm going to say, of just trauma in general, and not continuing these cycles? Is there a way that we can do that, either like as a collective or on that macro level, as opposed to just the micro work?
Well, I think, you know, that we also need to acknowledge the indoctrinated perceptions and narrative that have filtered into our systems in the domestic violence work, the sexual assault work, the gang violence, all this, you know, the narrative about protection really has moved to the end of punishment. People need to be punished, right? And really, yes, people need to be accountable, but the reality is, can you bring accountability and healing, as opposed, because punishment does not bring healing. Punishment, all it does is reinforces the wounds, right? So it's not like people don't need to be accountable and they don't need, you know, that, but I think that part of, you know, the reclaiming of our sacredness in all of us is that we need to be in relationship with one another. And as practitioners, you know, we need to spend time with each other. We need to have our own circles, you know, ongoing. And I know at National Compadres Network, we have our own círculos that we do. We always, you know, we have our own healing circles that we do amongst ourselves. It's part of our staff time. It's part of what we do. We say we don't give the teachings, you live the teachings, right? We also, you know, recognize that that, you know, we will get triggered, and we need a space to begin to talk about those wounds that we have, and those wounds that are difficult, you know, for us to explore. But again, I think the framework of how we look at this needs to expand, because a lot of it is still very Western, very power and control, very physical, mental. And let me, if you imagine a circle, and the circle cut into four quadrants, and there'd be physical, and then emotional, and then mental, and then spiritual, right? So a lot of the field is based on the physical, mental, you know, so that's power and control, right? That's the physical, mental stuff, and that's very masculine. Physical and mental are masculine concepts. The emotional, spiritual are the feminine concepts, right? And so we need to balance and have all four, right? We need to, yes, the physical behavioral manifestations, there need to be boundaries, we need to have rules, we need to have all of those things. Mental, that you know, that we need to have plans and all of this and safety plans, and there needs to be all of it. But how do we take care of the emotional side of us? How do we take care of the relationships? And woundedness is disconnection. When we disconnect our mind from our feelings, when we disconnect our heart from our spirit. So the fourth one is spiritual. And spiritual, I don't mean religious. I mean your sense of sacred purpose. I mean your sense of hope, your sense of vision. When you're wounded, you stop visioning. You stop dreaming. You stop believing that you can be anything else than what you've been told you can believe, you know? And also, you don't believe you can be healed. You believe, I'm going to be like this forever. So the spiritual is really, really important. And that's where creativity comes in. That's where art and music and visioning and danza and, you know, having fun with each other and cooking and, you know, all of that, that spirituality, that creativity, you know, that's what we need to be doing now is how do we vision, you know? And, you know, and I think about it with, I have granddaughters, you know, and it's amazing. My little granddaughters teach me so much. They teach me so much about what's important in life, you know. And you know, my little granddaughter, she's now older, but when she was about 4, she was at the house, and you know, she likes to play. She wants to play with Tata. Tata, can we go play? Mika, I'm doing some work. Okay, well, when can you play? A little while, Mika. And 2 minutes later, is it a little while? You know, okay, Mika, yeah, I'm gonna. And so she wants to go outside, and we take her. She wants to play in the sandbox. We're playing in the sandbox. And she's making cakes. Tata, we have to make cakes because we have to sing happy birthday to everybody in our family. Like everybody's like 40 people, right? And I'm saying, oh my gosh. And after about the 6th birthday song, I said, you don't want to go on the swing? You don't want to go? No, Tata, we got to sing to everybody. I don't want nobody to feel bad. Okay, I'm going to. So by the 12th time, my back is hurting. Okay, you don't want to go? No, Tata. And then she says, Tata, I got to go to the bathroom. Oh, okay. All right, let's go, Mija. And I'm so glad because I could get up, and I take her inside and I tell my daughter, Mara's got to go to the bathroom. So, okay, Dad, it's okay, I'll take her. And then she turns to me. My granddaughter says, no, Tata, you take me. What? You take me to the bathroom. And I'm looking at my daughter. I said, oh, what do you think? She's not good, Dad, take her. She knows what to do. She just wants you to go in there with her. See, and I had to ask my daughter because I don't know what her rules are. I don't know what her boundaries are for her I don't know. Even though she's my daughter, I don't know if she trusts me. Right? I mean, and it's important for me just because I'm the dad, the grandpa, because I'm her dad, I don't dictate. I turn to my daughter, what do you want? Take her, Dad. Just tuck her dress in so it doesn't get in the water. Okay. So I take her in there, I tuck her dress in. She then straddles the toilet. She straddles the toilet and I don't want her to fall in because I don't want to get in trouble. And then she looks at me, she says, Tata, get out. What? Now get out. And I'm saying, what get out? And then she says, Tata, I need my privacy. And I'm saying, what the heck? This girl's 3 and what does she know about privacy? Right? But she has a voice. At 3.5, she knows about boundaries. And she trusts me enough that she knows she can tell me what she needs and I'm going to listen to her. At that moment, I know I've done some healing. I know my family is healed because I would never say that to my grandfather. I would never say that to my grandmother. I would never say this is what I needed. And so I walk out and I close the door. And about 2 minutes later, Tata, come back in. And I go back in. When I come back in, she's standing over the toilet, pointing at a big piece of caca. Look at that, I made a big, and she's clapping. So there we are clapping over caca, right? So, what the heck, we're clapping over caca here, right? And then I get the lesson. And lessons come in different ways. You know, she's showing me probably the stinkiest thing in her life. But if I can't handle her showing me that at 3, she's not coming to me at 13. And I give thanks that I've done some work in my life. And my granddaughter trusts me enough that she will share the most stinky thing in her life. And I see it as an honor. I see it as a blessing. I don't shame her and judge her. That's healing over generations. You know, and that's the hope, right? That's the hope that we can honor each other that way. Even when we bring stinkiness or whatever to each other, or, bring ugliness, or we made a mistake or we didn't do right, that we can learn from that. It's not about the punishment, it's about learning, right? How do we create spaces in which we can embrace even when someone, is hurting, and make them accountable? Because I said flush the toilet means your caca, you flush it, right? But at the same time, you know, walk with them along the journey. And I think that's the critical thing, because we have, incorporated so many narratives about who you can trust and who you can't trust, who we should work with, who we should not work with. And let me just be real honest here. I'm a psychologist as well, and I've dealt with, almost everything in 40 some years. I've dealt with people that are not only wounded at the physical level, but then the next level is emotional level. So somebody's behavior is inappropriate, but emotionally they know it's not right, right? So to me, okay, that's just a behavioral manifestation. But then you have people that are wounded at the physical level, but emotionally they're shut down. They justify. So that's a whole different level of woundedness, right? Then they mentally, now they justify it. That's a different level, right? But when it gets down to the spiritual level, where now part of who they are is wounding others, that's a whole different level of accountability. And we, in our way, our traditional way, we recognize that with somebody like that, you don't leave them alone with anybody. They may need to be isolated because their spirit is not intact enough to respect other people's boundaries. They need another type of healing. So I wanted to be real clear with everybody that's listening. I'm not saying that everybody should be, just allowed to be in a circle and heal that way. Some people need a lot more protection, need a lot more accountability. But but even that person, punishment is not going to help them, right? They may need a different type of intervention. May need to be isolated, but even in that isolation, somebody needs to come to them and begin to work with them to see if their capacity is that at some point in their life, maybe they'll be able to heal. I don't know. It depends on the individual. But we need to restructure our system in such a way that we are opening up opportunities, changing the narrative, and recognizing that we need to be doing this work, talking about sacred relationships as soon as children are born. We're doing a lot of work in schools, right? And unfortunately, our educational system is, really also influences this. And in our school systems, there's a lot of inequity. There's a lot of, racial inequity, gender inequity, all kinds of things. And often when young children are not feeling respected, it's dismissed. So a lot of the work we're doing in schools is talking about the center of education is relationships, that we must build sacred relationships with children early on. And part of that is because some children come from families that are wounded. So then their parents are just surviving. They may not get that. But all of us know that if we have a teacher that sees us, that embraces us, that acknowledges us, that blesses us, then that can start our healing right there. And so we need to begin with children, but also we need to recognize it goes all through the developmental pattern, even to older people as well. That healing needs to go on that way, and we need to embrace it in that sense as well.
Well, everything you just shared was incredible and amazing and so touching. And I feel like I would love to have this conversation for 2, 3, 4, 5 hours. And I love those examples that you drew from even your granddaughter and saying that, there's lessons in everything. That was just such a beautiful explanation of even safety. And just wow, that's all I can say. We have about 10 minutes for a Q&A with Jerry. And then after that, Jerry, I'd love if you would share, after we wrap up with our Q&A, any final thoughts that you have. But I just want to say that I feel like I've been deeply impacted. I've learned so much, even being a preventionist here at this agency for the last 7.5 years and working in the space of DV prevention. I feel like there was a lot that you shared that really just even opened my eyes to, a lot more purpose and how we should be doing this work. So for anyone who has a question for Jerry, feel free to use the chat feature, and we will use the next 10 minutes for a Q&A. And then after that, we will hear some final thoughts. We'll give everyone a couple minutes.
Okay.
Stephanie said the story about your granddaughter made her tear up. So thank you for sharing. Same here. I was trying to hold it in because I'm on camera, which you just said not to do.
Well, I think, we all have spaces in which we can't cry readily, but we need to create spaces in which we can, and I think right now it's really evident our lack of connection with people. People are mourning and having difficulty because they're not, connecting to one another. My other granddaughter, Anaya, she just turned 6, and a couple of weeks before her birthday, she asked her mom, "Mom, is COVID going to be over by my birthday?"
Oh.
And her mom says, "Why?" She says, "Because I want to hug my cousins. I want to hug my tias. I want to, and the reality is that little children know the need for connection. So healing is about connection, right? And woundedness is about disconnection. And you could be disconnected to your heart. You could be disconnected to people. Drastic woundedness is when you categorize people. That's what racism is. That woundedness of categorizing, I will not be around those people, or those people are that disconnection, right, is deep woundedness. And for many people in this society, it's a soul wound. That's why we struggled with it for so long. Unless this society recognizes and acknowledges the woundedness that it's caused, we'll never heal. So
That's deep and so important. We have a question here from Marissa. She asks, what tools besides talk therapy do you recommend for a man who is just recognizing that his machismo and alcohol abuse are affecting him and his family?
Yeah. So, talk therapy is a very Western way. I mean, just talking. I think healing comes from a lot of other things. It comes from connection. It comes from relationship. It comes from, and you can use all kinds of things. But I think let me clarify what machismo is. Because people throw that term around, and I think that we need to understand that false machismo is a sense of patriarchy and misogyny. But in culture, the sense of macho just means male, right? It means, and all of us have the masculine in us. But there's a concept called sacred manhood that is really the true machismo. And sacred manhood means that you honor all the elements of who you are. You honor the masculine, but you honor the feminine, you honor the child part of you, and you honor the elder part of you. Sacred manhood means you can call on any one of those at any time, right? Sometimes you need to call on the masculine. You need to call on those characteristics. But sometimes you need to step into the feminine. But sometimes it's okay to be children and play and be innocent. And sometimes we need to be wise like the elder. So the true machismo is the flexibility. And if you go to pueblitos in Mexico or other pueblitos, you'll see men doing all kinds of things. They do everything. They don't know whatever they need to do. They'll wash dishes. They'll take care of kids. They'll clean. And that is the true sense, of that. So first of all, we need to clarify. But I think what you're talking about is, we have círculos for men, and in those círculos for men, we welcome them in, and they are able to hear stories of other men, and the question becomes, what do you want? Do you want a relationship, or you want to be right? Do you want to do what's comfortable for you, or do you want to do what is going to be helpful to your relationship? And it's a question, because you may be acostumbrado drinking, but that might not be helpful. That might not be, and you have to choose the bottle or your family. Just choose it. Well, no. It's a choice. Let's just be clear. And so we work a lot, not only with men. We have let me just mention, as part of the NCN, we also have a National Comadres Network. We have women that are working with women and girls, and then also LGBTQ. We have a whole focus on all relationships that way. But in terms of men, a lot of times what we find is men are wounded and they've never dealt with it and they've never understood it. But also many times they feel there's an expectation. There's an expectation of acting a certain way, and they haven't seen other men act any other way. So when we bring them together and we offer the opportunity and the example and give them the ability to talk about their struggle, to talk about their dilemma, you know, a lot of men are afraid, you know, and I recognize now, you know, my dad's fear when my dad told my sister, "You no silent, no, you're not gonna go out, you stay here," you know. And I remember that, you know, and I wasn't gonna do that with my daughter, but at 15 she wanted to go out, and I'm thinking, well, who are you going out? And the fear hit me, and I had to decide. I'm not going to yell at her, but what do I say? And and so I said, well, you got to bring him here so I can meet him. Well, Dad, why do I have to bring him here? Well, because he's going to go out with you. Well, but we're just going to the movies, or I'm not dating him. And I said, but you still got to bring him. And I'm still using those old, and I'm thinking, what's going on? And my daughter says, are you afraid? I said, yeah, Mija, I'm afraid. What are you afraid of, Dad? I said, no, I'm afraid because I saw a lot of things, Mika. Mm-hmm. Well, how can I help you with your fear? I mean, we had that conversation, right? So I think sometimes you need to put men in places where they can have this conversation, where they can unpack what they're really going through, where they can lower their voice, where they can figure out alternatives to dealing with the fear, to dealing with the inequity, dealing with the insecurity, and then they can figure out alternative ways. And even being able to say, well, no, that's a late way, I'm afraid, because I mean, to be able to say that, I'm afraid, I don't know what to do. You know, I mean, but a lot of times you don't know how to do that unless you see somebody else do that and they give you those alternatives. So we have circulos that we work with men. We have, you know, all kinds of, we train people in fatherhood and teen fatherhood and rites of passage. We do a lot of work around sacred relationships and violent relationships, the dichotomy of both, because we need to choose, you know, what we do and what we're going to practice, you know, and it's not easy. It's not easy, but there are those things that are available. You know, and I think it's not just about getting all the men that have been, you know, arrested for domestic violence and putting them in a batterers group, because then you're missing 98% of all the men that need, you know, so, and if you invite people, we're going to have a group on men and violence, there ain't nobody going to come. But if you have a group on fatherhood, they'll come. If you have a group on mechanics, and then we talk about mechanics in a car, but you talk about mechanics in a relationship, you know, but other ways of healing is through music, through poetry, you know, through ceremony. We do drumming, you know, we do a lot of different things, you know, with families, you know, el baile, you know, just dancing with each other. How do we learn to dance? You know, and I've had men say, I don't know how to dance. I want to dance with my daughter, but I don't know how to dance, you know, and you know, and it's really touching when you see a man teach another man how to dance. Te voy a enseñar, vente para acá, come here. You know, I mean, and you think, you know, the guys are teasing, hey, look at this, look how much he'll do for his daughter, you know, and then we tell that story when we graduate them. You know, your dad wants you to dance, but he didn't know how to dance. And he went far, so much he wanted to dance with you that he danced, he let another man show him, you know. But those are the stories you don't hear, you know, about healing, you know, that I think are important.
Very beautiful, very, very beautiful solutions. And we're going to wrap up with one last question, then we'll head to some final thoughts. But I thought this was really interesting and important, and I'd love to hear the answer as well. Someone had asked if you have any advice for white practitioners to sensitively address or acknowledge cultural issues around pain and healing when it comes to working with BIPOC clients. And for those who aren't aware, the acronym stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. And if you have any advice.
Yeah, I think, you know, the first step of anything is what we call conocimiento, acknowledgement. And so we all say, well, who are you and who am I? And, you know, if you're a white practitioner, you say, tell me who you come from, where you come from, and that's it. And acknowledge when you don't know things. You know, the people that come to us can teach us so much about life. You know, sometimes we think because we're the practitioner, we should be in control, we should know. Nah. We become facilitators of the journey. Our role is not to know the answer all the time. It's not even to guide, it's to walk with. And if you recognize that even farm workers that come from the field that have no literacy have a lot of knowledge, they have a lot of experience, you know, and we can honor that, then they can guide us. Because, you know, in my community in Compton, they were black and brown, but there was one güerito, one white family, and he used to hang out with us. And after a while, he used to talk like us, walk like us, and everything. But because he was willing to be with us and not be hierarchically above us, we accepted him as our brother. So nobody would mess with him. Nobody would, you know, and he would stand with us. You know, and I remember we got pulled over by the cops one time, and the cop says, "Hey, you can go." Told the white kid, "You know," he says, "No, these are my friends. I'm gonna stay here, right? These are my friends. You do to them what you do to me." And you know, and that said a lot. You know, are we only going to be in relationship with people when they're our clients, or do we advocate for them 24/7 in everything we do in our life? People know the difference. You know, so if you really want to work with you know, people of color, then you have to be about their causes and their needs and the social injustice as well. That will teach you so much, and that will give you credibility too.
Thank you so much, Jerry. I feel like that was absolutely perfect. And there are a number of amazing questions in the chat, and I would love to stay here all afternoon and ask all of them. And a couple of people have asked, you know, how they're able to get in touch with you. Jerry is the co-founder of the National Compadres Network. And of course, feel free to visit his website, and you can find out more about him and the agency and the work that they do. But Jerry, to wrap us up this afternoon, first, I just want to express my gratitude for you sharing this time with me and giving of your time and dedicating to helping us all understand such important and critical truths. And I feel like what you've shared has definitely had a huge impact. And for those who are wondering, it will be recorded. It is live on Facebook, so the recording will be there, but it'll also be up on the Laura's House YouTube, and you all are welcome to have access to that and share it. But before we wrap up this afternoon, Jerry, do you have any final words that you would love to impart and leave us with?
Well, I just want to let people know that, you know, suggest that you listen to our podcast. We have a Healing Generations podcast that you can go and check out. We have about 14 or 15. It's all on healing. And then my most recent book is Recovering Your Sacredness. And you can get that on my website or on Amazon. But what I really just want to leave you with is, you know, just to thank all of you, you know, that all of you that are doing this work, first of all, remember that you are sacred just the way you are. You know, that you're a blessing. And you need to remind yourself of that, especially in these times. And that all of us have a sacred purpose. But we have a responsibility of being true to the work, but being true to ourselves, and then being a voice for those that don't have a voice. You know, and I want to thank you for all the work you do. You know, as a male, I want to apologize to all the women. For any harm that we've caused as men to you. It's not your fault. It's not because of something you've done. It's because of our woundedness. And I'll say on my behalf and the behalf of the thousands and thousands of men that I worked with over the years that we want to heal. We are on our path to healing. We just need the ability to do that and the support. And so I want to just say that to all of you, you know, that we are trying to recover our sacredness. And we're on this journey, and we have, you know, look at our website. We have a lot of resources there if people need that as well. But thank you all for giving me the time and the space, and really appreciate you, Classical Medley.
We appreciate you too, Jerry. Thank you so much, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We hope that you all have an amazing rest of your day, and please feel free to reach out and connect with us or Jerry if you'd love more information. And I'm glad that you mentioned the podcast and the book. Those are two things that I'm going to be checking out as well. So with so much gratitude, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.